Title: The Lucky Ball Saga, Episode 3, Luckily the Ball Returned. Tyler stared at the red ball sitting on his desk, his mouth dry with fear. It sat there, innocent as ever, gleaming in the early morning light. He didn't understand. He tossed it away, buried it under a pile of rubbish in the alley, far from his house, far from his room. And yet there it was, waiting for him, almost watching him. He reached out to touch it, then hesitated, pulling his hand back. The memories of Lewis's accident flooded back to him, along with the strange incidents that had happened to his friends. The ball wasn't just a harmless toy. He knew that now. It was something else, something darker. But what could he do? Every time he tried to get rid of it, it found its way back to him. Maybe I need to destroy it, he thought. He sat up straighter, staring at the ball as a plan started to form in his mind. Later that day, Tyler gathered his courage. He wrapped the ball in an old towel and stuffed it into his backpack, making sure it was out of sight. His parents were downstairs, distracted with breakfast preparations, and he slipped out the door unnoticed. He took a long route through the neighborhood, careful not to look at anyone, not to draw attention. He didn't want to explain why he was carrying around a mysterious ball wrapped in a towel. He wasn't even sure where he was going until he found himself standing outside the old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The warehouse had been empty for years, ever since the factory closed down. It was a place that kids usually avoided, a place where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. But today it was exactly what Tyler needed, a place where no one would see him or question what he was doing. He slipped through a gap in the fence and made his way around to the back entrance, pushing open the rusted metal door. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the smell of dust and mildew. Broken machinery and stacks of empty crates cluttered the vast, echoing space. Sunlight filtered in through the cracked windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Tyler found a clear spot in the center of the room and pulled the towel out of his backpack, unwrapping the red ball and setting it down on the concrete floor. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart race as he studied the ball. It looked so ordinary, just a simple rubber ball, but he knew better now. He searched around the warehouse, finally finding an old metal pipe on the floor. It was rusted and slightly bent, but it would do. Tyler returned to where the ball waited, took a deep breath, and raised the pipe above his head. Without giving himself time to think, he swung down hard, hitting the ball with all his strength. The impact sent a shock up his arms, but the ball barely moved, rolling a few inches across the floor before coming to a stop. Frustrated, Tyler tried again, hitting it harder this time, his hands shaking as he brought the pipe down repeatedly. He felt a strange resistance, as if the ball was somehow absorbing each blow, refusing to break. Finally, on his fourth or fifth swing, he heard a faint pop. Tyler stopped, breathing heavily, staring at the small tear in the ball's surface. It was only a small split, but it was something. With renewed determination, he lifted the pipe and struck again, widening the tear. He could see something inside the ball, some strange, dark material that didn't look like rubber. He prodded it with the end of the pipe, and it seemed to pulse, as if alive. Tyler felt a wave of nausea and pulled back, dropping the pipe. He stumbled away, his eyes fixed on the ball, now split open with something dark oozing out. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, but he hadn't expected this. A feeling of dread, as if he'd uncovered something that should never have been touched. He quickly gathered the towel, wrapping the torn ball as best as he could. He left the warehouse in a daze, his mind racing. He'd damaged it, but he hadn't destroyed it, and that thought gnawed at him all the way home. That night Tyler lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in his mind, the eerie image of the split ball and the strange pulsing material inside it haunting his thoughts. He tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake, that he'd somehow provoked the ball. As he drifted in and out of restless sleep, he dreamed of the ball. In his dream, it was whole again, bouncing down the street, following him, no matter how fast he ran. It appeared in strange places, in his school locker, on the dinner table, even at the foot of his bed, watching him with an unseen gaze. The dream shifted, and he saw Lewis again, falling from the swing, his face contorted in pain. Then he saw his friends, Sarah, Mike, Ollie, all stumbling, falling, their faces twisted with terror. Tyler woke with a start, his heart pounding. The room was dark, but he felt the same suffocating dread he'd felt in his dream. He glanced around, half expecting to see the ball lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing there. He lay back down, closing his eyes, trying to convince himself it was just a dream. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that something terrible was coming. Something he couldn't stop. The next day, Tyler's nerves were frayed. He avoided his friends at school, feeling a strange urge to keep them at a distance. He didn't want them asking questions, didn't want them to notice the dark circles under his eyes or the way his hands shook whenever he thought about the ball. But during lunch he overheard something that made his blood run cold. "Did you hear about Ollie?" one of his classmates was saying, his voice low and serious. "He broke his arm last night, fell down the stairs." Tyler's stomach dropped. He hadn't seen Ollie since their game of catch at the park. Could the ball be responsible for his accident too? His mind raced as he pieced together the events of the past few days. Lewis, Ollie, everyone who touched the ball had been hurt. It wasn't just a coincidence. The ball was cursed or haunted, or something far worse. And he was the one who had found it, the one who had brought it into their lives. He tried to shake off the guilt, but it clung to him like a shadow. He needed to do something to put an end to this nightmare before anyone else got hurt. That evening, Tyler went to the alley behind his house where he'd first thrown the ball into the rubbish bin. He was almost certain it would be gone, that it would have somehow found its way back to him. But when he opened the lid, he found the ball exactly where he'd left it, torn and broken, but still very much there. It felt like it was mocking him, refusing to disappear, no matter what he did. In a moment of desperation, Tyler grabbed the ball and headed to the back of the alley, where an old rusted drain cover lay half buried in the ground. He pried it open, revealing a dark, foul-smelling hole leading down to the sewers. Without hesitating, he dropped the ball into the drain, watching it fall into the darkness. He quickly replaced the cover, feeling a strange sense of finality. This was it. He'd done everything he could to get rid of it. There was no way it could come back now. For the next few days, Tyler felt a cautious relief. The ball didn't reappear, and there were no strange accidents. Ollie was still recovering, and Lewis had returned to school, his wrist in a cast but otherwise fine. Tyler began to believe he'd finally rid himself of the cursed object, that he could move on and forget about it. But then, one afternoon as he was leaving school, he heard someone call his name. "Tyler!" He turned to see Sarah running up to him, a worried expression on her face. "Have you seen this?" she asked, holding out her phone. She showed him a photo someone had posted online. It was of the ball torn and filthy, but unmistakably the same one he'd tried to get rid of. It had been found by a group of kids playing near the sewer entrance at the edge of town. Tyler felt his heart sink. No matter what he did, no matter how far he threw it, the ball always came back. And now it was involving other people, drawing them in, spreading its curse like a disease. He looked at Sarah, his face pale, his mind racing with fear and guilt. He couldn't hide it anymore. He had to tell someone, had to explain what had been happening, even if they didn't believe him. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something wrong with that ball. It's dangerous. I don't know how, but it hurts people. It doesn't matter how far you throw it or how many times you try to get rid of it. It always comes back." Sarah stared at him, her brow furrowing. "Are you serious?" Tyler nodded, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. "I think it's cursed or something. Ever since we played with it in the park, everyone who's touched it has had an accident. It's like it's alive.